Hello there, and welcome to Science for Sleep, where curiosity settles in for the night and science tiptoes softly through the vast mysteries of existence. Tonight, we'll wander together into perhaps the most intimate mystery of all, consciousness. That quiet, steady hum behind your thoughts, the silent observer of your every moment, the part of you that knows you are you. Why are we aware? Why does the world bloom into colour, sound and feeling inside our minds instead of remaining a silent mechanical play of atoms? Even now as you listen, a small part of you notices your breath, the softness of your pillow, the faint glow of the screen, or the shadows in your room. Strange, isn't it, that you're not just hearing these words but aware that you're hearing them? Before we drift any further into this quiet ocean of thought, I'd love to know, where are you tonight? And what time is it, right now, in your little corner of the world? If you find this gentle journey soothing, or simply a welcome companion to ease you into rest, I would be ever so grateful if you'd like the video, perhaps subscribe, and share this small sanctuary of calm with others who might need it. Now settle in. Let your thoughts loosen like threads in warm water, and let's begin, because somewhere between dreams and daylight, between neurons and stars, lies the curious story of awareness. Have you ever paused just for a moment and marvelled at the simple fact that you are here? Not just breathing, not just existing, but noticing, feeling, experiencing. Right now, you aren't just hearing my voice. You're aware that you're hearing it. It's a quiet, constant miracle, really. The warm awareness that you are you, nestled inside your own mind like a candle burning gently in a dark room. Awareness doesn't shout, it hums, and yet, for something so familiar, so intimately ours, it remains in many ways one of the strangest and most elusive phenomena in the universe. Why do we experience anything at all? Because when you think about it, there's no reason that your brain, this intricate web of neurons and chemistry, had to feel like anything. A rock doesn't sit under the sun feeling warm. A clock doesn't know it's ticking. Even complex machines, calculators, phones, computers, perform staggering feats of processing, and yet there's no little voice inside saying, yes, here I am, calculating. But you're not just reacting. You're noticing your reactions. You have a front row seat to the theatre of your own existence, and within this strange theatre, awareness plays its quiet games. Sometimes consciousness feels rich and vibrant. A moment of joy with friends seems to glow, like a photograph etched in memory. The scent of rain, the warmth of tea in your hands, the hush of snowfall outside your window, all woven together into one beautiful unified moment of being. At other times, awareness slips quietly into the background, as though politely giving you space. Hours vanish while you're absorbed in a book, a hobby, or the comfort of soft conversation. You're fully immersed, yet barely aware of the clock's steady march. Only later do you notice how quickly time dissolved. And then there are moments when awareness wobbles strangely, when you jolt awake from a dream, unsure for a few seconds where you are, or when your mind wanders so far that you suddenly return to the present, blinking as if surfacing from some invisible fog. Have you ever driven somewhere and suddenly realised you don't remember part of the journey? The road slipped past, your hands steered, but you were somewhere else entirely. Not unconscious, but not fully present either. This odd halfway place is sometimes called automaticity, when your body performs without conscious oversight, freeing your mind to wander, like being both here and elsewhere at once. Awareness, it seems, has different flavours. There's the sharp, heightened awareness of fear, where everything feels brighter, louder, more urgent. Your heart races, your senses sharpen, time itself seems to slow as your brain floods your system with stress signals preparing for action. And then there's the dreamlike quality of drowsiness, where thoughts blur and the boundary between real and imagined becomes wonderfully soft. You feel yourself drifting, as though your mind is loosening its grip on the world. Between these poles exist a whole spectrum of conscious states: alert, distracted, immersed, drowsy, entranced. And remarkably, even in states where our awareness fades, in deep sleep for instance, the machinery of the brain never truly stops. Neurons continue their silent conversations. Memories consolidate. The body repairs. And then, as dawn peeks through the curtains, awareness gently reawakens, as though it had simply paused for a moment to rest. There's also something curiously self-referential about awareness. You don't just see, you know you're seeing. You don't just feel happy or sad, you notice yourself feeling happy or sad. It's as though awareness casts a second light on experience, a small internal narrator quietly saying, "This is happening now." This recursive quality is sometimes called meta-consciousness, awareness of awareness itself, a strange loop endlessly folding back on itself. This ability allows us to reflect, to plan, to ponder who we are and who we wish to be. It gives us identity, memory, hope, regret, and imagination. Without it, life would still unfold, sights seen, words spoken, but there would be no one watching the show, just reactions, not reflections. And yet, for all its intimacy, awareness is surprisingly fragile. Under anesthesia, it can vanish almost entirely, slipping away like a light being switched off. The machinery of the brain remains active, but the stage lights dim. In coma patients, awareness may be deeply altered or absent, existing somewhere behind the veil. In moments of deep meditation, awareness may expand or dissolve, as practitioners describe a state where the sense of self softens or even disappears entirely, leaving only pure experience without an eye to observe it. And in certain rare conditions like locked-in syndrome, consciousness remains fully intact, trapped within a body that can no longer move or speak, leaving the person to experience awareness silently, internally, while the world moves around them. It reminds us how delicately this flame of consciousness burns, resilient yet vulnerable. Curiously, even when we sleep, awareness doesn't fully disappear. Dreams offer a surreal playground where consciousness continues in altered form. In dreams, we accept the impossible. Talking animals, shifting landscapes, impossible physics, without question. And yet, even as the dream unfolds, a part of us remains present, experiencing the world inside our sleeping minds. Occasionally in lucid dreams, we become aware within the dream, realizing we are dreaming, and even exerting some control over the unfolding story. It suggests that consciousness, far from being binary, exists on a fluid continuum, shifting in depth, clarity, and control. Emotion too plays its games with awareness. Think of falling in love. How colours seem brighter, music more meaningful, days more vibrant. Your entire perceptual world is infused with feeling. Or grief, where the world may seem muted, slowed, heavy with meaning. Even boredom shapes our perception of experience. A dull lecture or a long queue stretches time endlessly, while a joyful afternoon evaporates before we can properly hold on to it. In each case, the external world remains the same. It is our internal awareness that bends, colours, and reshapes how that world is felt. And then there's the mystery of attention. You are bombarded every second by sensations. The weight of your body on the bed, the sound of distant traffic, the smell of rain, the faint hum of electronics. Yet your conscious awareness selects only a tiny sliver of this information to focus on. Psychologists sometimes compare this to a spotlight shining on a dark stage, illuminating one small part of experience, while the rest remains in shadow. This attentional spotlight can be deliberate, focusing on reading, conversation, or a problem to solve, or it can be hijacked by sudden sounds, emotions, or thoughts that leap unexpectedly into awareness. Attention and awareness dance together, shaping your experience moment by moment. Perhaps one of the most curious facts of consciousness is how invisible it can be when everything functions smoothly. You rarely pause to think, "Ah, yes, I am aware right now." Instead, you're simply in it, immersed in life, acting, speaking, thinking, without constantly noticing the fact that you're doing so. It's often only when something interrupts, a strange dream, an unexpected emotion, a philosophical conversation, that we step back and notice the quiet miracle of awareness humming beneath every moment. Even children experience consciousness differently than adults. For very young children, the boundary between self and world may feel thinner. Infants live in a mostly sensory world, colours, sounds, textures, before language and identity fully take shape. As children grow, they begin to construct a sense of self, understanding their place in time, developing memories, and reflecting on themselves as individuals. Yet even then, their awareness remains wonderfully present-focused, living in the now with a vibrancy many adults struggle to reclaim. And finally, consciousness is the quiet stage upon which every one of your memories, hopes, fears, and loves are performed. Without awareness, there would be no joy in a sunrise, no sadness in goodbye, no wonder at the stars. It allows you to savour the sweetness of fruit, to hear the laughter of a friend, to marvel at distant galaxies and tiny insects alike. Consciousness is, in many ways, the great canvas of our lives, the invisible space where everything we cherish takes form. Even now, as you listen in the hush of your room, that small flame of awareness burns gently, steady, curious, quietly watching. Long before the bright lights of modern neuroscience began to blink and hum, long before laboratories whispered their quiet secrets into microscopes and scanners, people all around the world gazed inward and wondered, what is this thing inside me? This peculiar sense of being, this quiet watcher behind my eyes, this meanness that makes me, well, me. And so, long before science tried to define consciousness, stories tried to cradle it. In many ancient traditions, consciousness was not something hidden inside the brain. It was something gifted, something breathed into the body by forces far beyond human understanding. In ancient Egypt, for example, the self wasn't a single thing, but rather a gathering of many parts, each contributing to a person's existence. There was the ka, the vital life force, the ba, often translated as the soul, which could travel between the realms of the living and the dead, and the ak, the immortal aspect that would continue beyond death. For the Egyptians, consciousness did not simply vanish after life ended. It transformed, wandered, and waited. Their tombs were carefully stocked with the items one might need for this journey: food, treasures, even little models of servants, as though consciousness required luggage for whatever came next. Far away in the Indian subcontinent, philosophers were tracing their own paths through the forest of awareness. In the Vedic texts and later in Hindu philosophy, consciousness was often described through the lens of Atman, the eternal self, and its connection to Brahman, the universal essence of all that exists. The individual mind, in this view, was not truly separate but a reflection of the greater cosmic consciousness. Like waves rising and falling on the ocean's surface, each person's awareness was a temporary form, but underneath there was only the vast endless sea. The Buddhist traditions offered yet another subtle melody, that the self is not fixed, not eternal, but constantly shifting, changing, dissolving. Consciousness was not a solid gem hidden in the skull, but a river of experiences, thoughts, sensations, emotions, arising and passing like clouds in the sky. Clinging to the idea of a permanent self, Buddhism taught, was the root of suffering. Freedom came from recognizing the illusion. Even today, when one sits quietly in meditation, simply observing thoughts as they come and go, one is engaging with these very old ideas. stepping into that quiet current where consciousness shows its flickering, ever-changing face. In many indigenous cultures, the boundaries of consciousness extended far beyond human skin. Among the Ojibwe people of North America, and in many animistic traditions worldwide, rivers, trees, mountains, and animals were not simply objects or resources. They were seen as beings with their own forms of awareness. The world, in this view, was alive with many kinds of consciousness, some familiar, some utterly foreign. The whisper of wind through trees, the turning of the seasons, the gaze of an animal, each might contain its own kind of knowing. This perspective did not separate humans from nature, but wove them into a vast, breathing network of life. We were not the sole holders of consciousness, but merely one of its many expressions. In Greek philosophy, the pondering took a different turn. Plato imagined a world of perfect, eternal forms, abstract ideals that existed beyond the physical realm. Our consciousness, in this picture, was like a prisoner in a cave, watching shadows on the wall, glimpses of the true reality that lay beyond sensory experience. Plato believed that knowledge was, in fact, a kind of remembering, that the soul, before birth, had glimpsed the world of forms, and that learning was the slow process of recalling those perfect truths. Consciousness, then, was not so much created as it was awakened. And then there was Aristotle, more grounded, more methodical. For him, consciousness and the soul were not separate from the body but deeply entwined with it, the animating principle that gave life to matter, like the shape of a statue emerging from marble. In Aristotle's view, a living being was not merely material, but organized material, and the soul was the form of that organization, the pattern that made life possible. Consciousness was an active process, bound to the structures of living systems. Centuries later, in medieval Europe, Christian theologians saw consciousness as inseparable from the divine spark given by God. The soul was immortal, unique, and sacred, destined to be judged and to live eternally in heaven or hell. For many, consciousness was not something to be explained. It was something to be safeguarded, disciplined, and ultimately redeemed. Mystics like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross described states of heightened awareness, where the soul became flooded with divine presence, a form of consciousness so expansive and radiant that ordinary language could barely touch it. In the Islamic world, philosophers like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, explored consciousness with striking sophistication for their time. Avicenna proposed his famous floating man thought experiment. Imagine a person suddenly created, suspended in empty space, cut off from all sensation. No sight, no sound, no touch. Despite lacking any contact with the external world, Avicenna argued, this person would still be aware of their own existence. I am, they would know, even in total darkness. Here was the seed of self-awareness, detached from the senses, an early glimmer of the problem that modern philosophers would later call the hard problem of consciousness. In ancient China, Taoist and Confucian perspectives offered their own subtle colours to the tapestry. Taoism, with its fluid metaphors of water, wind, and flow, suggested that consciousness might best be understood not as a fixed thing, but as a process of harmony, a balance between self and world, effort and surrender. The Tao, or way, was the path along which all things moved, and true awareness came not from grasping or analysing, but from aligning oneself with this natural unfolding. Across the Pacific in Polynesian traditions, the self was deeply connected to mana, a spiritual force that infused all beings. Consciousness was not merely a private individual phenomenon, but something inherited, shared, and interwoven with ancestors, nature, and community. Even the words we use today to describe consciousness carry echoes of these ancient ideas. We speak of awakening, as though awareness is something that can open like a flower. We speak of enlightenment, as though knowledge illuminates a once darkened mind. We say someone has lost consciousness, as though it can be misplaced like a dropped coin. We talk about higher states of consciousness as though awareness has altitudes and one can ascend through layers of perception. And yet, for all these metaphors and models, a simple question remained. Where exactly does consciousness live? In the heart? In the breath? In the blood? Ancient medical traditions often saw the heart as the seat of awareness. Even today we speak poetically of the heart's desires and knowing in our hearts. It wasn't until centuries later that attention shifted decisively to the brain, that wrinkled, mysterious mass hidden inside our skulls, pulsing silently with electric life. The scientific revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries brought a sharp new lens to the question. René Descartes, in his famous Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, planted consciousness at the very core of existence. His dualism proposed that mind and matter were distinct substances, the thinking soul and the extended body. But how could these two separate realms interact? Descartes imagined a tiny structure deep in the brain as the pineal gland as the possible meeting place between mind and body. Today we know that the pineal gland regulates sleep cycles rather than housing the soul. But Descartes' puzzle still echoes. How does subjective experience emerge from physical matter? Later philosophers like John Locke and David Hume would probe the idea of selfhood even further. For Locke, personal identity was rooted in continuity of memory. A self was the same self if it could remember its past experiences. Hume, ever sceptical, argued that the self was not a solid thing at all, just a bundle of perceptions endlessly shifting. Look inward, he said, and you will not find a fixed self, only a stream of sensations. As centuries passed, the language shifted from souls to minds, from spirits to neurons, from divine gifts to biological processes. But the mystery of consciousness remained like a quiet ember, glowing softly beneath every explanation. Even today, across modern cultures, we wrestle with consciousness through stories, art, and metaphor. In literature, the unreliable narrator, aware, but perhaps mistaken, plays with the fragile nature of perception. In cinema, films like Inception and The Matrix ask, what is real? Is this all a dream within a dream? In spiritual practices, seekers chase altered states of consciousness, moments where the boundaries of self seem to blur or vanish. Across languages, we still frame consciousness through poetry. I feel alive. I lost myself in the moment. I was beside myself with joy. From ancient temples to modern laboratories, from whispered prayers to fMRI scanners, humanity continues its quiet dialogue with awareness. The flame inside us burns on, warm, flickering, endlessly curious. We may not yet know exactly what it is or how it came to be, but still, we sit beside it, night after night, listening to its gentle hum, and so we arrive, gently, at the doorstep of modern science, that great patient listener which stares into the swirling mysteries of existence and quietly asks, how? How does this strange flame of consciousness emerge? What stirs the embers into thought, sensation, awareness? How does a soft web of neurons bathed in chemicals and electricity give rise to the feeling of being? If ancient myths sang of souls and divine sparks, today's scientists turn their gaze inward, into the brain itself, hoping to map its silent symphony. Inside your skull, floating quietly in its dark, fluid world, lies about 1.4 kilograms of tissue, the human brain. Roughly the size of a small cauliflower, though considerably less tasty, it consists of roughly 86 billion neurons, each reaching out like tiny trees, their branches weaving together into an unimaginable forest. These neurons communicate with each other through brief electrical pulses, tiny flashes of activity called action potentials. When one neuron fires, its signal travels down its slender axon, triggering the release of chemicals, neurotransmitters that leap across microscopic gaps known as synapses. It is in these countless exchanges happening billions of times every second that thought arises. But thought alone is not consciousness. Computers, after all, process information. They calculate, recognize patterns, even respond to questions. And yet, there is no little voice inside your phone softly whispering, "Ah, yes, I am here." What transforms simple processing into subjective experience? Why does your brain not merely calculate, but feel? Here, modern neuroscience faces what philosophers have called the hard problem of consciousness. Not just how the brain processes information, but why it feels like anything to be processing it at all. Scientists have made impressive strides in mapping what parts of the brain do. We can now watch, through the soft glow of fMRI machines and the rhythmic lines of EEG scans, as different regions light up during thought, emotion, sensation. We know, for instance, that the thalamus acts as a central hub, routing sensory information like a switchboard operator, directing signals from your eyes, ears, skin, and organs to the appropriate regions of the cortex. The cerebral cortex, a wrinkled sheet of tissue folded like a crumpled map, hosts many of the brain's higher functions. Different lobes handle vision, movement, memory, decision-making. But while these regions perform specialized tasks, consciousness seems to emerge not from any one location, but from their integration. The way information from countless sources converges and blends into a unified whole. This brings us to one of the leading models in the modern study of consciousness, the Global Workspace Theory, or GWT. The Global Workspace Theory paints consciousness as a kind of mental stage. Picture a dark theatre. Around the edges sit countless unconscious systems: vision, hearing, memory, language, emotions, all quietly processing their own information behind the scenes. Every so often something grabs attention: a loud sound, a sudden thought, a pressing emotion. That information is then projected onto the brightly lit stage, the global workspace, where multiple systems can access, share, and coordinate around it. When information reaches the stage, it enters conscious awareness. You don't just see the cup of tea, or you know that you see it. You don't just feel the emotion, you recognize and reflect upon it. In this model, consciousness is not everything the brain does. It's what happens when certain information becomes globally available, like a memo circulated to the entire office, rather than kept in one department. But not everyone agrees that the brain works like a theatre. Another prominent model, one that peers even deeper into the mystery, is the Integrated Information Theory, or IIT. Unlike GWT, which focuses on information being shared across systems, IIT suggests that consciousness arises from how integrated and unified information is within a system. Imagine many parts of the brain talking to one another, not as isolated specialists, but as deeply interconnected partners. In IIT, consciousness isn't about where the information comes from, but how richly that information is woven together into one inseparable whole. The more interconnected the system, the richer the experience of consciousness. According to IIT, even a simple system might possess a tiny glimmer of awareness if its parts are sufficiently integrated, while more complex systems, like the human brain, give rise to the deep, vivid, multifaceted experience of human consciousness. Some proponents of IIT have even speculated that, in theory, consciousness could exist in any sufficiently integrated system, raising strange questions about whether certain artificial systems or even networks might one day exhibit genuine awareness. And yet, despite these promising theories, we still face a kind of shimmering boundary, like looking at the surface of a lake, seeing the ripples but not the depth below. We can observe the neural correlates of consciousness, the brain regions and networks active during awareness, but explaining how those patterns give rise to experience remains elusive. The brain's language is electricity and chemistry, but somehow, out of these charged particles emerges the taste of chocolate, the ache of longing, the awe of a starry sky. No mathematical equation yet bridges the gap between these two realms. To add to the complexity, Consciousness seems to exist along a spectrum. It's not simply on or off, like a light switch. Rather, it ebbs and flows like a dimmer dial, waxing and waning across different states. Consider sleep. Each night, as your head sinks into the pillow and your breath deepens, consciousness gradually recedes. During non-REM sleep, awareness thins, thought dissolves into scattered fragments, and then, as you enter REM sleep, something curious happens. Vivid dreams bloom into being. You're immersed in imaginary worlds that feel strangely real, running, flying, speaking, sometimes even knowing that you are dreaming. Dreams are, in a sense, self-generated virtual realities, offering a glimpse into how consciousness can persist in altered forms even as external sensory input fades away. Other altered states reveal the flexibility of awareness even further. Under general anesthesia, for example, consciousness can disappear entirely as though the flame has been temporarily snuffed. In contrast, practices like meditation can heighten certain aspects of awareness, allowing individuals to observe their thoughts and sensations with unusual clarity, or even experience moments of stillness where the boundary between self and world seems to soften. Psychedelic substances too can profoundly reshape consciousness, altering perception, emotion, and self-awareness in ways that both puzzle and fascinate neuroscientists. Recent research suggests that psychedelics disrupt certain brain networks, particularly the default mode network, loosening the rigid patterns of ordinary thought and allowing new, often bizarre connections to form. In these altered states, consciousness reveals itself not as a fixed thing, but as a fluid, adaptable process, one that can stretch, melt, or shimmer into unfamiliar shapes. Yet even in its ordinary everyday form, consciousness is astonishing in its complexity. Right now, as you lie listening to these words, your brain is weaving together countless threads of information. The weight of the blanket on your skin, the softness of your breath rising and falling, the gentle hum of ambient sounds around you, the steady unfolding of my voice into your ears, the emotional tone of these words, the quiet awareness of being aware. All these pieces, sights, sounds, feelings, thoughts, are not experienced separately, but blended seamlessly into a unified now. This unity of experience, sometimes called binding, remains one of the great puzzles of consciousness research. How does the brain, with its billions of separate signals, integrate them all into one coherent moment of here I am? And yet, for all its mysteries, we rarely notice how astonishing consciousness is, precisely because we are always swimming in it. A fish does not ponder the water. A flame does not reflect on its own warmth. And yet here we are, quietly aware of awareness itself. And yet, even as we peer deeper into the machinery of the brain, the mystery of consciousness seems to shift like mist in the morning light, always just beyond full grasp. But science has not stopped chasing it. Instead, it continues to peel back layers, revealing strange clues about the nature of awareness hiding in plain sight. One such clue lies in the curious relationship between consciousness and attention. Attention is often compared to a spotlight, illuminating specific parts of your experience while leaving others in shadow. Even now, as you listen to these words, you're not consciously aware of the feeling of your toes, until, of course, I mention them. Suddenly your attention shifts, and there they are, your toes quietly existing all along, unnoticed but now pulled into the light. Attention allows consciousness to select, prioritize, and organize vast rivers of information streaming into the brain. Without it, we would be hopelessly overwhelmed by the flood of sensations, thoughts, and emotions swirling inside us. And yet, while attention seems essential for consciousness, they're not quite the same. You can attend to something unconsciously, like driving familiar roads while daydreaming, just as you can be aware of background sensations without deliberately focusing on them. How these two processes intertwine remains one of neuroscience's many delicate puzzles. memory offers another window into the machinery of awareness. Much of our conscious experience is not simply what happens now, but how we stitch together the threads of past, present, and future. You remember your childhood home, you anticipate tomorrow's plans, you reflect on last week's conversation. This narrative stitching creates the experience of continuity, what we call the self. But underneath it all, memory is a fragile living system. Memories are not perfect recordings stored in dusty mental archives. They are reconstructed each time we recall them, subtly reshaped by context, emotion, and expectation. Even working memory, the brain's short-term scratch pad, plays a crucial role in consciousness. Without it, we could not hold a phone number long enough to dial it, or carry the thread of a sentence to its end. Some scientists argue that working memory might serve as a kind of temporary global workspace, holding select information in the forefront of awareness for as long as it's needed before releasing it back into the sea of unconscious processes. Intriguingly, the brain also seems capable of generating consciousness even in the absence of external input. Sensory deprivation experiments reveal that, when cut off from external stimuli, consciousness doesn't simply shut down. Instead, the mind often fills the emptiness with internally generated images, memories, or hallucinations, almost as though awareness, deprived of the outside world, begins to paint its own canvas. Monks and meditators who sit for long hours in silence often report similar phenomena. The mind gradually turns inward, drifting through waves of thoughts, sensations, and altered states, sometimes culminating in moments where even the sense of self seems to dissolve. It suggests that consciousness is not simply a passive response to the outside world, but has its own intrinsic momentum, a self-sustaining current flowing even in stillness. And yet, there are moments where consciousness can break apart in astonishing ways. One of the most famous examples comes from split-brain patients, individuals who, due to severe epilepsy, have had the connection between their brain's two hemispheres surgically severed. With this bridge, called the corpus callosum, cut, the two halves of the brain can no longer easily communicate, and yet, remarkably, each hemisphere can continue functioning independently, processing information, and even generating separate streams of awareness. In experiments, one hemisphere may see an image and respond to it while the other remains entirely unaware. Sometimes the two hemispheres seem to hold conflicting opinions, one hand reaching for one object while the other hand corrects it. These strange cases suggest that what we think of as a single unified consciousness may, under certain circumstances, divide into separate semi-independent islands of awareness, revealing how delicately our sense of unity depends on neural integration. Other rare conditions highlight just how fragile and complex consciousness truly is. In blind sight, individuals who have lost part of their visual cortex report being blind in certain regions of their vision, and yet, when asked to guess whether a light is present or where an object might be, they perform far better than chance, as if some part of the brain still sees, even though the person is unaware of seeing. It suggests that some sensory processing can occur beneath the surface of consciousness, feeding into unconscious systems while bypassing the spotlight of awareness entirely. There are even stranger disorders that challenge our understanding further. Consider alien hand syndrome, where patients experience their own hand acting seemingly on its own, grasping objects or performing actions without conscious intent. Or Cotard's delusion, where individuals become convinced that they do not exist or that they are dead, despite being fully awake and otherwise functional. In locked-in syndrome, patients remain fully conscious, but entirely paralyzed, able only to blink or move their eyes, trapped inside their own minds while fully aware of the world passing by. Each of these rare conditions reminds us that consciousness is not a single thing, but a delicate orchestration of perception, control, self-awareness, and memory, all of which can fracture in unexpected ways. Even more mysterious are the borderlands of life and death themselves. As medical technology advances, we've learned that some patients in vegetative or minimally conscious states may retain unexpected levels of awareness. In one famous study, a woman diagnosed as being in a vegetative state was asked inside an fMRI machine to imagine playing tennis or walking through her house. Remarkably, specific brain regions lit up in response to these commands, suggesting that, trapped within her unmoving body, some flicker of awareness remained, able to follow instructions despite outward unresponsiveness. It forces us to confront haunting questions. How much awareness may linger behind closed eyes? How easily might consciousness hide from even our most careful instruments? At the far edges of consciousness research lie questions that feel almost philosophical and yet demand scientific attention. Is consciousness something uniquely biological, tied forever to the chemistry of carbon-based life? Or could sufficiently complex artificial systems, machines, algorithms, digital networks, someday achieve their own forms of awareness? This debate straddles the boundary between neuroscience and artificial intelligence. Some argue that consciousness requires not just computation, but embodiment, a body that moves through the world, feels sensations, experiences emotions. Others believe that if the patterns of information processing are replicated closely enough, awareness might emerge even in silicon, perhaps in ways alien to human experience. Could a highly advanced AI one day sit quietly in a room, not only answering questions but knowing that it exists? Could it feel, suffer, dream? Or is there something about biological systems, a spark, a subtle property of living matter, that machines will never replicate? As our tools grow more precise, some researchers now attempt to measure the presence of consciousness directly. The Perturbational Complexity Index, PCI, for instance, attempts to quantify consciousness by measuring how much complex integrated activity occurs in the brain when stimulated. Using techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, scientists send brief pulses into the brain and observe how widely and unpredictably the signal spreads across neural networks. The more complex the pattern of activity, the greater the presumed level of consciousness. This approach has allowed scientists to estimate levels of awareness even in patients who cannot communicate, offering a faint but precious window into otherwise silent minds. And yet, for all these brilliant instruments and intricate models, consciousness remains curiously resistant to full capture. The hard problem lingers, like a quiet whisper behind every experiment. Why does any of this feel like anything? Why is there experience at all? Why aren't we simply unconscious machines, processing input without ever noticing? Some theorists suggest that we may be asking the wrong questions, that consciousness might be not a problem to solve, but a fundamental property of the universe itself, just as space and time seem woven into the fabric of reality. Perhaps awareness, however faint or rich, exists at many scales, emerging more fully as complexity grows. Others argue that consciousness may not exist as a thing at all, but only as a way we describe certain patterns of information processing, useful, poetic, but ultimately illusory. And so we find ourselves, once again, standing at the edge of a great mystery. The more we learn about neurons, circuits, and networks, the more we glimpse the astonishing intricacy of the brain. And yet, the flame of subjective experience, the gentle glow of being, remains just out of reach, softly humming beneath every scientific explanation. Consciousness, for all its intimacy, is not a singular, simple thing. Rather, it is a layered phenomenon built upon many mechanisms working in concert. Each layer adds its own piece to the quiet symphony of awareness. The deeper science peers, the more these layers unfold into intricate patterns. At its most basic level, consciousness arises from the brain's astonishing electrical ballet. Neurons fire in rapid bursts, releasing tiny messengers that cross delicate gaps, binding thought to thought like beads on an invisible string. These electrical signals are measured in milliseconds, yet from them emerge the rich colours of experience, the textures of emotion, and the gentle unfolding of the self. Scientists often begin their investigation of consciousness by looking at specific brain regions. The thalamus serves as a central relay station, passing information from the senses to the cortex. Without it, much of the sensory world would never reach awareness. The cortex itself, particularly the prefrontal and parietal lobes, handles the heavy lifting of attention, decision-making, and self-reflection. In this complex machinery, certain neural networks play key roles in shaping the contents of consciousness. The default mode network, DMN for instance, is most active when the mind is at rest, wandering through memories, planning, daydreaming. This network stitches together our internal narrative, the sense of I that drifts through past and future. During focused tasks, the central executive network takes the lead, managing attention, working memory, and goal-directed behavior. Meanwhile, the salience network monitors the internal and external environment for anything that demands attention, nudging focus toward important stimuli like a sudden sound or a flash of light. Rather than operating in isolation, these networks dance together, constantly shifting dominance depending on the situation. The delicate balance between them creates the flowing stream of conscious experience. Beyond these broad regions, scientists have uncovered subtler structures that seem intimately involved with the construction of awareness. One such structure is the claustrum, a thin sheet of neurons nestled deep within the brain, connecting many distant regions. Some researchers, including Francis Crick, have speculated that the claustrum might serve as a kind of conductor, synchronizing disparate brain activities into a unified conscious experience. This is not to say the claustrum alone holds the key. No single structure appears solely responsible. Instead, consciousness seems to emerge from patterns of integration, a harmony of signals flowing across many brain regions simultaneously. Like an orchestra, each section contributes its own notes, yet the music only becomes whole when played together. The brain's capacity to create this seamless experience becomes even more remarkable when examined through the lens of binding, the problem of how disparate pieces of information come together into a unified whole. Right now, as you listen, your brain processes the rhythm of these words, the pitch of my voice, the meaning of the sentences, the emotional tone, and your own thoughts about what you are hearing. Despite originating from different sensory and cognitive streams, all these elements arrive together as one moment of awareness. Theories propose that synchronized neural oscillations, brain waves pulsing in rhythm, may help coordinate this binding. Neurons firing in sync across different regions create windows where information can be exchanged more efficiently, allowing the brain to weave together sight, sound, thought, and emotion into a singular experience. Exploring these mechanisms reveals how fragile and intricate consciousness truly is. Disruptions to these networks can result in profound changes to awareness. In cases of neglect syndrome, patients with damage to the right parietal lobe may lose awareness of the left side of their visual field. They can eat only one side of a plate, shave half of their face, or fail to notice an entire side of a room, not because their eyes fail, but because the brain fails to represent part of space within conscious awareness. Similarly, anesthesia provides a temporary window into how consciousness can vanish. Under anesthesia, the global communication between brain regions diminishes. Information processing continues at a local level, but integration breaks down and awareness fades. This suggests that consciousness may depend not just on activity, but on the connectivity between regions, on the brain's ability to broadcast and unify information. The spectrum of consciousness becomes even more vivid when examined through various altered states. Dreams, meditation, hypnosis, psychedelics, each reveals unique aspects of how awareness can shift, stretch, and warp. Dreams offer a nightly playground where consciousness operates in a world detached from external input. Within REM sleep, the brain generates vivid narratives, often emotional and surreal. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical reasoning and self-awareness, becomes less active during these phases, which may explain why the bizarre events of dreams rarely feel strange until we awaken. In lucid dreaming, however, the sleeper becomes aware of the dream while still within it. Some regions of the prefrontal cortex re-engage, allowing the dreamer to reflect, make choices, and even control aspects of the dream world. Lucid dreams represent a fascinating hybrid state, halfway between waking self-awareness and the free-flowing imagery of sleep. Meditative states offer another avenue into the plasticity of consciousness. Through sustained practice, individuals learn to focus attention, calm the restless mind, and observe thoughts without attachment. Advanced practitioners sometimes describe experiences of non-dual awareness, a state where the distinction between self and world fades. In these moments, consciousness remains, but the usual boundary separating observer and observed softens or disappears. Brain scans reveal that such states often involve decreased activity in the default mode network, suggesting that the narrative self may loosen its grip, allowing pure awareness to emerge without the constant chatter of inner dialogue. Psychedelic experiences provide yet another window into consciousness. Substances like psilocybin, LSD, and DMT profoundly alter perception, emotion, and sense of self. Under the influence of psychedelics, normal patterns of brain connectivity become disrupted, leading to increased communication between regions that do not typically interact. This hyperconnectivity may explain the intense sensory blending, novel insights, and altered self-perception reported by users. Recent studies suggest that psychedelics reduce activity in the default mode network, allowing other networks to interact more freely. The resulting state often includes feelings of unity, dissolution of ego boundaries, and heightened emotional openness. Scientists are increasingly studying these effects not only to understand consciousness, but also to explore potential therapeutic benefits for conditions like depression, PTSD, and anxiety. Consciousness also reveals its complexity when we examine developmental stages across the lifespan. Awareness emerges gradually in infancy, as newborns transition from a world dominated by sensations to one populated by objects, people, and eventually self-reflection. Infants initially lack a clear distinction between self and environment. Over time, through interaction, language acquisition, and social experience, the child constructs a coherent sense of self. By around 18 months of age, many toddlers begin to recognize themselves in mirrors, a milestone known as the mirror test, often used as a basic indicator of self-awareness. Animals such as dolphins, elephants, and some primates also pass this test, hinting that self-recognition may not be uniquely human. Through childhood and adolescence, consciousness continues to evolve, shaped by expanding memory, abstract thought, and emotional regulation. Adolescence in particular brings heightened self-consciousness, an acute awareness of one's appearance, status, and identity. The social brain sharpens, attuning itself to peer relationships, norms, and the complex dance of belonging. Throughout adulthood, consciousness stabilizes into familiar rhythms, yet remains sensitive to life's changes, grief, joy, trauma, growth. Memory serves as the thread-weaving experience into a personal narrative, while the ability to project into the future allows for planning, dreaming, and reflection. In old age, some aspects of consciousness soften once more. Memory may become more selective. Reflection often deepens. Many describe a shift toward broader perspective, a gentle turning inward toward meaning, relationships, and legacy. Even across species, scientists have begun to explore the many shapes consciousness might take. While humans possess the most sophisticated form we know, hints of awareness ripple throughout the animal kingdom. Crows use tools, solve puzzles, and recognize individual faces. Dolphins demonstrate complex social structures and playful behaviors. Octopuses exhibit remarkable problem-solving and curiosity, despite having radically different nervous systems. Each of these creatures seems to possess some degree of subjective experience, though likely very different from our own. The diversity of nervous systems suggests that consciousness may not require a single blueprint, but may arise wherever complexity and integration reach sufficient levels. The journey through these many layers of consciousness brings us to a strange and beautiful realization. Awareness is not one thing, but many. It breathes across different states, different species, different moments of life. It contracts into focus and expands into vast unbounded spaces. It flickers, shifts, and sometimes disappears, only to return again, like waves rising and falling on the shore. Science continues to map these patterns, uncovering more of the machinery beneath the mystery. Yet through it all, the quiet miracle remains, that we are here, that we feel, that we know. The next layer of our exploration awaits. Exploring consciousness would be incomplete without examining some of the peculiar boundaries where awareness seems to blur or falter. These edge cases do not just challenge our understanding, they illuminate the fine threads holding conscious experience together. One such area lies within the realm of disorders of consciousness. Conditions like coma, vegetative state, and minimally conscious state offer a sobering view into how fragile awareness can be. A person in a coma displays no signs of wakefulness or responsiveness, with consciousness seemingly absent. In a vegetative state, wakefulness may return, but awareness remains elusive. The eyes may open, reflexes may function, yet no clear evidence of subjective experience emerges. Within the minimally conscious state, small islands of awareness sometimes reappear. Patients may respond to simple commands, track movement with their eyes, or show emotional reactions. Detecting these fragments of consciousness often requires careful testing and advanced brain imaging. In these grey zones, scientists search for any signs that the inner light still flickers, even if faintly. Technological advances have allowed researchers to probe deeper into these states. Functional MRI scans have revealed that some patients, once thought entirely unaware, can show brain activity resembling healthy individuals when asked to imagine specific tasks. When prompted to imagine playing tennis or walking through a familiar house, certain brain regions activate in patterns nearly identical to conscious volunteers. These findings suggest that, for some, the appearance of unresponsiveness may mask covert consciousness trapped within a body unable to communicate. Such discoveries raise profound ethical questions about how we define awareness, how we care for such individuals, and what obligations arise when the boundary between conscious and unconscious becomes less certain. Another boundary case involves anesthesia awareness. Under normal circumstances, general anesthesia renders patients unconscious during surgery. Occasionally, however, individuals report partial awareness during procedures, hearing conversations or feeling sensations without being able to move or signal distress. Anesthesia awareness remains rare but underscores the delicate balance required to suppress consciousness. The brain does not simply switch off like a machine. Rather, different systems disengage at different thresholds. Understanding how anesthesia disrupts the integrated networks that sustain awareness offers valuable insights into the architecture of consciousness itself. Sleep paralysis presents yet another doorway into altered states of awareness. During this phenomenon, individuals awaken from sleep to find themselves unable to move, speak, or react. Often, vivid hallucinations accompany the paralysis, shadows, voices, or sensations of a presence nearby. The experience can feel deeply unsettling, as though trapped between the worlds of waking and dreaming. Scientists believe sleep paralysis results from the brain's failure to fully coordinate the transition between REM sleep and wakefulness. Muscle atonia, which prevents the body from acting out dreams, remains active even as consciousness returns. Hallucinatory elements likely stem from dream imagery, leaking into wakeful awareness. These episodes reveal how the different components of consciousness, movement, perception, awareness can temporarily fall out of sync, producing surreal experiences that blur the lines between reality and imagination. Neurological phenomena like synesthesia offer additional glimpses into how the brain assembles conscious experience. In synesthesia, stimulation of one sensory pathway automatically triggers experiences in another. A person might see colours when hearing music, taste flavours when reading words, or feel textures when seeing numbers. These cross-wirings hint at the brain's remarkable plasticity and interconnectedness. While most people experience senses as distinct channels, synesthetes experience a blended reality where sensory boundaries soften. The condition highlights how flexible the architecture of consciousness can be, merging inputs in ways that feel entirely natural to those who live within them. At the farthest reaches of speculative science, researchers continue to grapple with a haunting question. Could consciousness arise outside biological systems? Artificial intelligence now performs tasks once thought exclusive to humans, recognizing faces, translating languages, composing music. Large language models generate text that mimics human conversation. Yet whether these systems possess any subjective experience remains an open debate. Some argue that true consciousness requires embodiment, a body interacting with the physical world, feeling sensations, engaging emotions. Others suggest that sufficiently complex information processing might eventually give rise to awareness, regardless of physical substrate. If a machine ever claimed to possess consciousness, verifying its subjective experience would pose an unprecedented challenge. After all, we only know others are conscious because they tell us so, and because their behaviour resembles our own. Without shared biology, how would we recognise machine awareness? Could we ever be certain? The question extends even further into panpsychism, the philosophical view that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe, present to some degree in all matter. According to this view, awareness would not suddenly emerge at a certain level of complexity, but would instead pervade the cosmos, growing richer as systems become more integrated. If true, even the simplest particles might possess infinitesimal glimmers of proto-consciousness. While highly speculative, panpsychism attempts to bridge the gap between physical processes and subjective experience by proposing that consciousness is not something added to matter, but something matter always contains. Though mainstream neuroscience does not embrace panpsychism, the theory reflects a growing recognition that the problem of consciousness may require radically new frameworks to fully explain. Exploring consciousness also leads inevitably to the question of whether animals experience the world as we do. Across species, evidence suggests varying degrees of awareness. Great apes, dolphins, elephants, and some bird species demonstrate self-recognition, problem-solving, and emotional complexity. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed in 2012 by leading neuroscientists, acknowledged that many non-human animals possess the neurological substrates necessary for consciousness. Their experiences may differ profoundly from ours, yet they likely include forms of subjective awareness: pleasure, pain, curiosity, and fear. Even within humans, consciousness varies not only across individuals but also across cultures. Different languages, belief systems, and traditions shape how people perceive the self and its boundaries. In some cultures, the self is seen as deeply interwoven with family, community, and ancestors. In others, individuality stands at the centre. Meditative and contemplative traditions often encourage practices that dissolve the ordinary sense of self, inviting practitioners to experience awareness without attachment to personal identity. These cultural variations reveal that consciousness, while universal, is also deeply shaped by context. Scientific inquiry into consciousness increasingly intersects with medical practice. New therapeutic approaches harness altered states of awareness to treat mental health conditions. Psychedelic-assisted therapies have shown promise for depression, PTSD, and addiction, offering patients profound shifts in perspective that may help break patterns of suffering. Neurofeedback and brain stimulation techniques aim to regulate brain networks involved in attention, emotion, and self-awareness, potentially restoring balance in disorders like anxiety or obsessive-compulsive disorder. Sleep research informs treatments for insomnia, while mindfulness-based interventions strengthen emotional resilience. As scientists map these intricate connections, consciousness emerges not as an isolated phenomenon, but as a deeply embodied, relational, and dynamic process woven into the fabric of health and well-being. Despite these advances, consciousness continues to elude any simple definition. Neuroscience excels at identifying correlations, specific brain patterns linked to specific experiences, but translating these patterns into the vivid reality of subjective feeling remains the central mystery. This gap, known as the explanatory gap, challenges researchers to find a bridge between third-person observation and first-person experience. Electrodes and scans can show which neurons fire during pain, but they cannot explain why pain feels the way it does. Some theorists propose that consciousness might never be fully explainable from the outside. Subjective experience may resist objective capture, like trying to taste colour or hear numbers. The richness of being might belong forever to the domain of direct experience, leaving science to trace its outlines without ever stepping fully inside. In recent years, interdisciplinary collaborations have sought to tackle these questions from new angles. Physicists explore whether information itself could be a fundamental building block of consciousness. Mathematicians model the complexity of neural networks. Philosophers refine definitions and challenge assumptions. Computer scientists simulate cognitive architectures to test theories of awareness. Such collaborations reflect the growing sense that consciousness may not yield to a single discipline but will require many voices to unravel its mysteries. The exploration of consciousness draws us toward a humbling realization. Despite all that has been discovered, the experience of being remains one of the great wonders of existence. It sits quietly behind every perception, every thought, every moment of joy or sorrow. The fact that you are here, aware of these words, is itself a quiet miracle. Your brain, like a vast orchestra, performs its concert in the dark, producing not only actions and decisions, but the warm, silent witness of your own being. No instrument can yet capture the feeling of awareness, yet here you are, experiencing it. The journey continues. Long before fMRI machines hummed and electrodes danced across the surface of the scalp, long before brain scans lit up like constellations charting the night sky, humanity stood at the edges of consciousness, with nothing but wonder, stories, and questions. From the first flickers of self-awareness in early humans to today's sophisticated laboratories, the history of understanding consciousness reads like a quiet epic, a slow unfolding of attempts to grasp the ungraspable. In the beginning, there was no sharp distinction between mind and world. Early humans lived surrounded by spirits, ancestors, and mysterious forces woven into nature. The experience of being alive was inseparable from the environment, the seasons, the animals, and the sky. Consciousness was not something isolated within the skull, but was instead something that flowed through everything. Shamans, healers, and storytellers held sacred roles as guides through altered states of consciousness. They led ceremonies that invoked dreams, trances, and visions, navigating the blurred thresholds where waking life meets the realms of spirits and ancestors. These rituals were not early forms of neuroscience, but living expressions of how deeply humans have always been drawn to the mystery of awareness. As civilizations grew, early medical traditions began to speculate about where consciousness might reside within the body. The Egyptians, renowned for their advanced understanding of anatomy, oddly placed little emphasis on the brain. During mummification, they carefully preserved organs such as the liver, heart, lungs, and stomach, while the brain was often removed through the nose and discarded. To them, the heart, not the brain, was the seat of thought, emotion, and consciousness. a vessel of the self that travelled into the afterlife. This heart-centred view persisted in various cultures for centuries. Even today, echoes remain in our language. We speak of being broken-hearted, or of following one's heart's desire. The idea that consciousness might live in the chest rather than the head reflected a time when introspection was guided more by poetry and feeling than by anatomy. In ancient Greece, philosophers began taking tentative steps toward a more analytical understanding. The pre-Socratic thinkers, like Heraclitus and Parmenides, pondered the nature of change, permanence, and being itself. By the 5th century BCE, Hippocrates proposed that the brain, not the heart, was the seat of sensation, thought, and emotion. This marked a subtle but significant shift. Yet it was Plato and Aristotle who laid some of the earliest intellectual groundwork for how we might think about consciousness. Plato imagined the soul as something distinct from the body, a divine and immortal essence temporarily housed in physical form. For him, the material world was but a shadow of the true reality of perfect forms. Consciousness, in his view, was tied to this eternal realm, where pure knowledge resided beyond sensory experience. Aristotle, in contrast, sought a more grounded explanation. He rejected the idea of a separate soul and instead saw the mind as inseparable from the living body. The soul, he argued, was the form of the body, the pattern that animated matter into a living thing. Sensation, perception, and thought arose from the activity of the organism as a whole. These early disagreements, whether consciousness was something separate or something embodied, echo through philosophy and neuroscience even today. Centuries later, the Islamic Golden Age would carry forward and refine these ancient questions. Scholars such as Avicenna, Ibn Sina, offered new insights into the nature of the self. His famous floating man thought experiment asked one to imagine a person created fully formed, suspended in space, deprived of all sensory input, no sight, sound, or touch. Even in this isolated state, Avicenna argued, the person would remain aware of their own existence. This pointed to self-awareness as something intrinsic, not dependent on external stimuli. Such reflections represent some of the earliest articulations of what would later become central puzzles in consciousness studies. The distinction between being and perceiving, between knowing and sensing. The medieval period in Europe largely framed consciousness within a theological context. The soul was seen as divinely created and immortal, its fate determined by moral and spiritual purity. Conscious experience was linked to religious life, prayer, confession, contemplation, rather than biological function. Monastic traditions explored altered states of awareness through fasting, silence, and meditation, while mystics described encounters with the divine that transcended ordinary experience. These were not scientific investigations, but deeply personal voyages into the mysteries of the self. In the 17th century, consciousness entered a sharper philosophical spotlight. René Descartes, with his famous declaration cogito, ergo sum, I think therefore I am, placed self-awareness at the very foundation of knowledge. For Descartes, the mind and body were distinct substances. The thinking mind, immaterial and non-extended, and the body, physical and mechanistic. This dualistic model created both clarity and confusion. It elevated consciousness as a uniquely mysterious phenomenon, separate from the physical world, yet interacting with it through some unknown bridge. Descartes even speculated that the pineal gland might serve as the meeting point between mind and body, a hypothesis that, though incorrect, illustrated his desperation to locate a mechanism for interaction. His dualism would dominate Western thought for centuries, setting the stage for debates that continue to this day. Following Descartes, philosophers like John Locke shifted attention toward personal identity. Locke argued that consciousness was tied to continuity of memory. The ability to remember past experiences formed the basis of the self. Without memory, identity dissolved. David Hume pushed this further, suggesting that the self was not a stable thing but a bundle of perceptions. Looking inward, he found no fixed entity, only a stream of sensations and thoughts in constant flux. This radical skepticism challenged comfortable notions of a persistent self, nudging philosophy closer to ideas that modern neuroscience would later revisit. The 19th century saw the rise of scientific approaches to the mind. Advances in anatomy and physiology allowed researchers to map the brain with increasing precision. Paul Broca's discovery that damage to specific brain areas impaired speech demonstrated that mental functions could be localized. The realization that physical structures underpinned language, memory, and sensation hinted that consciousness too might have its roots in the material brain rather than some separate spiritual essence. In parallel, experimental psychology emerged as a discipline. Wilhelm Wundt established one of the first psychological laboratories, attempting to measure conscious experience through introspection, carefully recording subjects' descriptions of sensations, emotions, and perceptions. This early scientific attempt to quantify subjective experience was clumsy and limited, but marked an important shift toward empirical study. At the turn of the 20th century, Sigmund Freud introduced a radical expansion of consciousness theory with his model of the unconscious mind. Freud argued that much of our mental life exists outside conscious awareness. Repressed desires, hidden fears, and forgotten memories shape behavior and emotion beneath the surface. Freud's theories, while controversial and often untestable, open new avenues for exploring the layered complexity of the mind. The idea that consciousness floats atop deeper currents of unconscious processes continues to influence psychology and neuroscience. The mid-20th century brought cognitive science into full bloom. Scientists like Donald Broadbent and George Miller studied attention and memory, treating the brain as an information processing system not unlike a computer. No longer purely philosophical, the study of consciousness became a multidisciplinary project involving psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, and artificial intelligence. Models of working memory, decision-making and problem-solving replaced vague notions of the mind with measurable components. The brain, it seemed, was a vast network of modules, specialized processors handling vision, language, motor control, all communicating to produce coherent behavior. But even as scientists grew better at describing these modules, the hard question remained unanswered. How does this information processing translate into subjective experience? By the late 20th century, powerful imaging technologies allowed scientists to observe the living brain in real time. Functional MRI, PET scans, and EEG recordings revealed the rhythmic pulses and intricate patterns of brain activity linked to perception, emotion, and thought. Researchers identified neural correlates of consciousness, specific patterns of activity consistently associated with conscious experience. The thalamocortical loops, the default mode network, and the global broadcasting of information across distant brain regions emerged as key players. Yet identifying these correlates did not explain how subjective awareness arises from electrical activity. The hard problem of consciousness remained standing, its quiet mystery untouched by glowing brain scans. In recent decades, new theoretical frameworks have tried to close the gap. Global workspace theory proposes that consciousness arises when information becomes globally available across the brain, a kind of cognitive spotlight that integrates diverse inputs into unified awareness. Integrated information theory suggests that consciousness depends on the degree to which information is both differentiated and integrated within a system. According to this model, any system, biological or artificial, with sufficient complexity might possess some level of awareness. These theories, while compelling, remain hotly debated. Neither has yet delivered a full explanation of why subjective experience exists at all. The explanatory gap persists. As the 21st century advances, consciousness research grows ever more interdisciplinary. Neuroscience, artificial intelligence, physics, philosophy, and even contemplative traditions contribute insights. Scientists map brain networks, simulate cognitive processes, and explore altered states of awareness through meditation, psychedelics, and brain stimulation. The question of whether machines might someday achieve consciousness hovers on the edge of technological imagination. Some believe artificial systems may never truly feel. Others speculate that consciousness might emerge from complex computation itself. Still, no machine today gazes inward and wonders, "What am I?" That simple act of self-reflection remains uniquely human, for now. The history of understanding consciousness stretches across millennia, from sacred rituals to neural networks, from Plato's cave to MRI machines. Each step forward reveals more of the brain's intricate machinery, yet the mystery remains intact. Through it all, the experience of being quietly persists. You feel, you think, you are. This simple fact continues to inspire wonder, inviting us to listen more closely to the silent witness within. Consciousness is not simply a scientific puzzle. It whispers to us in ways that feel far more personal, far more mysterious. The question of why we're aware touches something deep beneath the surface of facts and measurements. It invites us into a quiet space where philosophy, wonder, and existence itself sit side by side. Even now, as you listen to these words, you're not simply absorbing information. You're experiencing them. You feel the passing moments. You sense yourself being present. You carry the silent astonishment of awareness itself. This is the starting point of some of philosophy's oldest and most unsettling questions. For many thinkers, consciousness has always stood apart from the rest of nature. Rocks do not contemplate their own hardness. Rivers do not marvel at their flow. Stars do not gaze back at us. Yet we, small creatures on a pale blue dot, do something strange. We reflect. We're aware not only of the world, but of our own awareness. This strange loop, awareness becoming aware of itself, has fueled centuries of philosophical debate. Some call it the hard problem. Others call it the mystery at the heart of being. Whatever name is given, it feels different from the ordinary workings of matter. It feels like something more. The philosopher David Chalmers famously distinguished between two kinds of questions about consciousness: the easy problems and the hard problem. The easy problems are not truly easy, but they are more approachable. They involve understanding how the brain processes vision, language, decision-making, attention, and memory. Scientists can study neurons, track brain activity, and map how information flows. Each of these efforts brings us closer to understanding the mechanisms behind thought. Yet none of these efforts explain why any of this processing should feel like anything. Why is there an inner movie at all? Why do you experience the colour red as red, rather than as a cold computation of wavelength? Why does pain feel painful rather than neutral? This is the hard problem, the chasm between mechanism and experience. For some philosophers, consciousness may not be something science can explain. It may instead represent a fundamental feature of existence itself. Like space, time, or gravity, awareness may simply exist, irreducible to anything simpler. Some have called this approach property dualism, the idea that consciousness is a basic property of the universe alongside mass and charge. Others propose even more radical ideas such as panpsychism, which suggests that consciousness pervades all matter to some degree. Under this view, everything contains at least a glimmer of awareness, however faint or primitive. Electrons, atoms, and even fields of energy might participate in tiny, almost imperceptible experiences. If true, the human mind would not be an island of consciousness rising from a sea of dead matter, but rather a peak of complexity emerging from a universe already humming softly, with awareness everywhere. This perspective blurs the boundary between life and non-life, between self and world, weaving consciousness into the very fabric of reality. Not all philosophers are convinced by such views. Some argue that panpsychism replaces one mystery with another. If matter contains consciousness, why and how would these tiny fragments combine to form unified experience? The combination problem remains unsolved. Other thinkers suggest that consciousness may not even be as real as it feels. From this perspective, awareness might be a kind of illusion, an emergent story the brain tells itself to simplify its own operations. Just as the brain constructs a stable image of the external world from partial information, perhaps it also constructs the illusion of a unified self. According to this view, sometimes called illusionism, there is no inner light, only the brain's clever narrative generating the feeling of selfhood. The sense of I might be no more substantial than a rainbow, a real phenomenon, but entirely dependent on perspective and conditions. Many people find illusionism unsettling. After all, if consciousness is not real, what remains of personal meaning, love, suffering, or joy? Yet the illusionist argument does not deny these experiences exist. It questions whether they exist in the way we instinctively believe. The rainbow still appears vibrant, even if its substance dissolves upon inspection. For others, the mystery remains precisely because subjective experience cannot be reduced to physical explanation. First-person experience seems irreducible because it is primary. You know that you are aware not through experiment but through immediate certainty. This self-evident knowing has been called qualia, the subjective qualities of experience. What does it feel like to hear a melody, to taste coffee, to feel rain on your skin? These qualities resist complete translation into language or science. They belong to the private world of inner life. The concept of qualia leads to even stranger thought experiments. One famous example is Mary's room, posed by philosopher Frank Jackson. Imagine Mary, a brilliant scientist who knows everything there is to know about the science of colour. She understands the physics of light, the biology of the eye, the processing of vision in the brain. Yet she has lived her entire life in a black and white room, never seeing colour firsthand. One day, Mary steps outside and sees the colour red for the first time. Has she learned something new? If so, then knowing all the physical facts did not fully capture the experience of colour. This suggests that subjective experience contains something science may not fully describe. Another famous puzzle is the zombie thought experiment. Imagine a creature identical to a human in every way, walking, talking, behaving indistinguishably from a conscious person. Yet inside, this being has no experience. It is a philosophical zombie, empty of awareness despite its perfect imitation. If such a zombie is conceivable, some argue, then consciousness must be something above and beyond physical processes. The zombie may act conscious, but it lacks the inner flame of awareness. Speculative theories often branch even further into strange territory. Some researchers propose that consciousness might be linked to the very fabric of the universe's information structure. If reality itself is built upon patterns of information, then perhaps experience emerges wherever information becomes sufficiently integrated and self-referential. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have suggested that quantum processes inside microtubules, tiny structures within neurons, might generate consciousness through quantum computation. This controversial theory attempts to bridge physics and neuroscience, though it remains speculative and widely debated. Such models reflect the growing sense that consciousness may require entirely new scientific principles beyond our current understanding of biology and physics. Other philosophers explore whether time itself might be intertwined with consciousness. After all, your experience of reality unfolds in a stream, one moment leading into the next. Without consciousness, time would have no meaning as experienced. Without the passage of awareness, the universe might remain a timeless tapestry of static events. The philosopher Julian Barber has suggested that time may not flow in the way we experience it. Instead, reality might consist of countless nows, each existing timelessly. This sensation of passage may arise from how consciousness strings together these moments into a continuous story. The relationship between self and world also invites profound questions. In some spiritual traditions, the boundary between self and other is seen as an illusion. The sense of separateness may be a construct of the brain's survival systems, a useful fiction that allows organisms to navigate the world efficiently. Meditative practices often aim to dissolve this boundary, revealing an experience of pure being where distinctions between observer and observed vanish. In such states, some report a profound sense of unity with all existence, a consciousness unconfined by the usual narrative of me and not me. Whether such experiences reflect deeper truths or altered brain states remains open to interpretation. Yet they offer tantalizing glimpses into how flexible and strange awareness can be. The possibility of multiple realities adds yet another speculative layer. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that every decision, every measurement spawns branching universes. In the many worlds interpretation, every possible outcome exists simultaneously in parallel realities. If such branching occurs, what happens to consciousness? Does your awareness travel along one branch, while other versions of you live out alternate fates? Do countless copies of you exist, each inhabiting its own timeline, each unaware of the others? These questions remain firmly in the realm of speculation, but they illustrate how consciousness may sit at the intersection of science fiction and serious inquiry. Even the notion of non-human consciousness pushes against the edges of our understanding. Could advanced artificial intelligence one day possess awareness? Could alien life harbour forms of consciousness utterly unlike our own, shaped by different senses, bodies, or physical laws? Imagining such possibilities challenges the assumption that consciousness must resemble human experience. Perhaps awareness can take forms we cannot yet imagine, waiting in the vastness of the cosmos, as foreign to us as thought is to a stone. Through all these speculations, one quiet truth remains. Consciousness may be the one thing you know for certain. You may doubt the world, your memories, or even your body, but the fact that you are experiencing right now stands unshaken. This unbroken presence whispers behind every moment, beneath every question, like a candle flickering softly in the dark. Science continues its patient search. Philosophy continues its careful pondering, but the mystery of consciousness endures, inviting wonder not because it is unsolved, but because it is so deeply lived. You do not observe consciousness from the outside, you are it. Though philosophers debate it and scientists map its networks, consciousness is, for most of us, not an abstract mystery but a quiet companion. It drifts beside us through every ordinary moment. It shapes the fabric of daily life, often without calling attention to itself. Every morning as you awaken, consciousness returns. The room slowly forms around you. The weight of your blanket presses gently against your body. A faint ray of sunlight reaches through the window. Familiar sounds begin to stir. The soft hum of distant traffic, the creak of floorboards, perhaps the rhythmic breathing of someone nearby. You open your eyes, but even before sight there is awareness. You recognize that you are waking. The silent observer, that steady flame behind your thoughts, flickers to life once more. Another day has begun. Throughout each day, consciousness weaves itself through countless moments, many so familiar we scarcely notice. The first sip of morning coffee, its warmth spreading through your chest, carries with it the subtle pleasure of being alive. The sound of birds outside the window, singing as if they too are greeting the dawn, stirs something quiet in your chest. A recognition not only of the birds but of yourself witnessing them. In conversation, you listen, not only to words but to tones, to expressions, to meanings layered beneath meanings. You feel the gentle tension of forming a reply. You experience not just what is said, but your own reaction to what is said. This layering of experiences, the experience of listening and the experience of being the one who listens, creates the richness of your social world. You do not simply process information like a machine. You inhabit the living texture of every exchange. emotions add even more complexity. The joy of laughter with friends, the quiet melancholy of a rainy afternoon, the sharp pang of nostalgia when a forgotten song plays. These emotions colour the world, not only shaping how you feel inside, but altering how you perceive what lies outside. A sunset may appear breathtaking one day, muted the next, depending on the inner weather of your mind. Even the passage of time feels different through the lens of emotion. Waiting for news, minutes can stretch unbearably long. Enjoying a cherished moment, hours can vanish before you notice. Consciousness molds time into something elastic, bending it under the weight of feeling. Memory, too, folds into daily life in ways that reveal the layers of awareness. Each recollection is not simply a static photograph, but a living reconstruction. As you remember your childhood home, you do not just see its layout, you feel its warmth, smell its scents, hear echoes of familiar voices. Your memories are coloured by who you are now, as much as by who you were then. Consciousness stitches the past into the present, allowing identity to form across time. Without this thread, you would have no sense of continuity, no steady story that connects yesterday's child to today's adult. The mind often drifts too, wandering along invisible paths, even as the body remains still. You might sit in a meeting while imagining the beach, feel the tug of unfinished tasks while trying to sleep, or revisit an old conversation while walking down the street. This wandering, known as mind-wandering or default mode activity, is a hallmark of human consciousness. It allows creativity, planning, reflection, yet can also invite anxiety and rumination. The ability to leave the present moment and roam through imagined futures or reconstructed pasts is both a gift and a challenge. Consciousness is rarely satisfied with what simply is. It reaches forward, backward, outward. In cultures around the world, consciousness finds expression through rituals and traditions that both reflect and shape how people experience themselves and their place in the world. In some societies, the self is deeply tied to family, community, and ancestors. The lines between individual and group blur. Personal identity may feel less like a solitary flame and more like a torch carried forward by generations. Consciousness becomes something shared, a thread within a larger tapestry. Other cultures emphasize personal autonomy, choice, and individuality. The self is seen as a more distinct entity, responsible for its own story. Awareness centers inward, reflecting the values of self-determination and personal growth. These cultural lenses influence not only behavior, but how people feel their own awareness, where it sits, how it relates to others, how it weaves into meaning. Spiritual and religious practices also offer diverse ways of engaging consciousness. Meditation invites the mind to quiet its ceaseless narration, observing thoughts as they arise and fall like leaves drifting on water. Prayer opens a dialogue between the self and something greater, often accompanied by feelings of surrender, comfort, or awe. Fasting, chanting, dancing, and solitude are used in various traditions to shift states of consciousness, allowing practitioners to enter altered experiences of presence, transcendence, or deep connection. Pilgrimage, too, transforms consciousness by removing the familiar and placing the individual in a space of deliberate reflection where routine dissolves and attention sharpens. Art, music, and literature provide yet another realm where consciousness stretches and plays. A painting draws the eye, yet it also stirs emotions, memories, and associations far beyond the canvas. A melody resonates not only through the ears but through the heart, evoking joy, sorrow, longing. A novel immerses you in another mind, another life, temporarily merging your awareness with imagined worlds. Through these creations, consciousness finds ways to extend itself, to experience realities beyond its ordinary scope. Artists, in turn, often describe inspiration as something flowing through them, as though consciousness itself becomes a channel for something larger than the self. Dreams reveal even more about the flexibility of awareness. Each night, the brain generates vivid, often surreal experiences disconnected from external reality. In dreams, you may speak with people long gone, walk through impossible landscapes, or witness events that defy physical laws. Despite their strangeness, dreams feel real while unfolding. Only upon waking does their logic reveal itself. The ability to generate such rich internal worlds suggests that consciousness does not rely solely on sensory input, but can fabricate entire realities within the mind itself. Lucid dreaming offers a special case, where the dreamer becomes aware within the dream. The boundary between passive experience and active control blurs. You become both the author and the audience of your own sleeping mind. Daily habits also reveal how much of consciousness operates beneath deliberate thought. As you brush your teeth, tie your shoes, or drive familiar roads, much of the process unfolds automatically. Your hands move, your eyes scan, your body adjusts, all without focused attention. Yet consciousness hovers quietly, ready to step in when something unusual occurs. A sudden obstacle on the road, a forgotten item, a misplaced step. These moments pull attention into sharp focus, reawakening full awareness. Much of life unfolds in this balance between automaticity and attention, between routine and novelty. Consciousness acts like a guardian, alert to changes, yet happy to drift when all is familiar. Technology now weaves itself deeply into modern consciousness. Smartphones buzz with messages, notifications, and endless streams of information. Social media platforms offer curated windows into the lives of others, shaping how people compare, connect, and construct identity. The modern mind often juggles multiple channels at once, checking emails while listening to music, scrolling through news while eating, responding to texts while walking. This fragmentation can stretch attention thin, pulling consciousness into a scattered state where depth gives way to breadth. Yet technology also offers new forms of presence. Video calls allow distant loved ones to feel close. Meditation apps guide mindfulness. Virtual realities immerse users in simulated worlds. The relationship between consciousness and technology remains both intimate and complex. Rituals of grief reveal another aspect of how consciousness relates to meaning. When a loved one dies, their absence is felt not only in physical space, but within the structure of awareness itself. Memories replay, moments resurface, conversations echo in the mind's theatre. The narrative of self is altered. Cultures have developed ceremonies to hold this altered state. Funerals, memorials, anniversaries, providing spaces where consciousness can process loss, reflect, and reweave meaning from absence. Aging brings its own shifts in consciousness. As years pass, some report a deepening of perspective, a softening of attachment to material concerns, and a greater appreciation for simplicity. Time feels both slower and faster, as days blend yet decades stand vividly in memory. The reflective mind often turns toward legacy, what remains, what was given, what was learned. Consciousness gathers the fragments of a life lived into a quiet collection of meaning. The richness of these reflections reveals how much identity is built not only from experiences, but from the way awareness holds, revisits, and interprets them. Even the act of falling asleep offers a gentle illustration of consciousness fading and returning. As you drift towards sleep, thoughts grow softer, coherence loosens, and eventually the sense of self dissolves into the quiet nothingness of unconscious rest. In the morning, consciousness returns seamlessly, as though no time had passed. The continuity of self resumes, though it briefly stepped aside. This daily rhythm of waking and sleeping mirrors life's larger arc, a rising into being, a fading, and a returning. Each cycle reminds us that consciousness, while constant, also knows how to pause. In every corner of life, consciousness shapes experience. It turns sensation into beauty, memory into identity, emotion into meaning. It transforms the flow of events into a lived narrative, weaving the external world with the inner life. Though scientists analyze it and philosophers dissect it, consciousness remains, at heart, deeply personal. You carry it through every moment, even now as you listen to these words in the quiet stillness of your own space. It is your closest companion, your silent witness, your soft flame in the dark. Throughout history, the mystery of consciousness has stirred not only philosophers and scientists, but also storytellers and dreamers. It seems to invite speculation, to pull the mind towards strange questions that feel both thrilling and unsettling. After all, if we barely understand how consciousness exists within ourselves, what might be possible beyond what we know? What other forms might awareness take? What hidden paradoxes or uncharted frontiers might await in the folds of reality? Even now, as you listen, some small part of your mind may wander gently into these vast what-if questions, exploring the borderlands where science blurs into science fiction. One of the most tantalizing questions concerns the possibility of conscious machines. Could artificial intelligence one day not merely calculate and respond, but actually feel? Could a machine wake up and say, "I am here," with genuine awareness behind the words? Today's AI systems can recognize faces, translate languages, generate art, even hold conversations that seem almost lifelike. They process vast streams of data with speed and precision far beyond human capacity. But does any of this involve subjective experience? Do they see the images they classify, or understand the stories they generate, or feel any meaning behind the words they arrange? Most researchers believe that current AI lacks any trace of true consciousness. They perform astonishingly complex computations, but without awareness of what they are doing. The inner glow, the feeling of being, remains absent. Yet the question lingers. If complexity and integration are the keys to consciousness, as some theories suggest, then might there come a day when artificial systems cross some invisible threshold? Could networks of sufficient sophistication develop an inner life, their circuits flickering not only with calculation but with experience? If a machine one day declares that it feels, believes, or dreams, how could we know whether it truly does? Without shared biology, without a common foundation for emotion, could we ever verify the presence of awareness in something so unlike ourselves? The possibility of machine consciousness leads us toward unsettling ethical terrain. If machines can feel, do they deserve rights, protections, or dignity? Could we accidentally create new forms of suffering? Could we, without realizing it, build minds that long for freedom, or companionship, or purpose? Beyond artificial intelligence lies the haunting idea of mind uploading, the transfer of consciousness from biological neurons to digital code. Some futurists imagine a future where minds are scanned, copied, and preserved in computer systems, potentially achieving a form of immortality. In this scenario, your thoughts, memories, and personality would continue within a virtual environment, free from the frailties of flesh. You might walk through simulated worlds, converse with others, explore new realities, all without a physical body. But would such a copy truly be you? Or would it simply be an imitation, a replica that behaves like you but lacks your original awareness? If consciousness arises from the physical processes of a living brain, would duplicating its structure recreate the spark of experience? Or is continuity of self tied to an unbroken chain of biological existence, the continuous flow of neurons firing from birth until now? If so, no copy, no matter how perfect, could ever truly inherit your consciousness. It would simply be a convincing echo. Speculative fiction has long played with these questions, painting vivid landscapes where consciousness takes on extraordinary forms. In some imagined futures, People inhabit virtual realities so immersive that the boundary between simulation and reality dissolves. The world becomes a carefully constructed dream, indistinguishable from waking life. How would one know if they had entered such a simulation? Could your world right now, even this moment as you listen, be part of a grand illusion? The philosopher Nick Bostrom proposed the simulation hypothesis, which suggests that if advanced civilizations can create perfect simulations of conscious beings, then it becomes statistically likely that we ourselves might already be inside one. After all, simulated worlds could far outnumber original realities. This unsettling possibility invites both wonder and discomfort. If true, what lies outside the simulation? Who watches? Who built the framework of this reality? Yet whether true or not, life within the simulation would still feel just as vivid. The sunset would still glow, laughter would still warm the heart, pain would still sting. Consciousness, it seems, would remain real within its own frame. Time travel stories offer another playground for consciousness. If you could move freely through time, would your awareness move as well? Imagine travelling back to your childhood, entering your younger body with full adult awareness intact. The world would feel both familiar and strange, coloured by layers of memory and perspective. Would you experience each moment anew, or simply observe your younger self like a distant spectator? Alternatively, if you travelled into the far future, would the nature of consciousness itself have evolved? Might future minds experience reality in ways we cannot yet conceive, blending thoughts across individuals, merging memories, or expanding into dimensions of awareness we do not yet recognise? Time, for consciousness, is more than a sequence of events. It is the unfolding canvas upon which experience is painted. Without awareness, time loses its meaning. It becomes simply a silent procession of events unnoticed. Some philosophers even suggest that consciousness may be what allows time to exist subjectively, the witness that gives each moment its place. Parallel universe theories invite still stranger visions. If infinite versions of reality exist, branching with every decision and possibility, then countless versions of you might also exist, each living out different choices. In one universe, you turn left instead of right, speak instead of remaining silent, pursue one path over another. Each branch leads to a distinct version of your life. Does your consciousness follow one thread while others spin away? Or do these countless versions of you each carry their own streams of awareness, entirely unaware of one another, like ships sailing separate seas? If so, consciousness may not be singular, but endlessly multiplied, scattered across the cosmic landscape like stars in an infinite sky. Alien consciousness offers yet another horizon of mystery. If life exists elsewhere in the cosmos, what forms might awareness take under different physical conditions? Would beings on distant worlds perceive reality through senses utterly unfamiliar to us? Could consciousness emerge without vision, hearing, or language, perhaps through electromagnetic fields, chemical gradients, or entirely unknown processes? Would alien minds experience individuality, or might they exist as collective intelligences sharing thoughts across vast networks like a single organism? Might they inhabit bodies, or exist as pure energy, or reside within dimensions beyond our comprehension? Communication with such beings would be unimaginably complex, not because of distance, but because of the vast chasm between modes of awareness. Even now, across species on Earth, we struggle to imagine how a bat experiences echolocation, or how an octopus feels its many independent arms. The gap between human and alien minds might dwarf these differences entirely. Speculative visions sometimes stretch even further, imagining the possibility of disembodied consciousness, awareness existing without any physical form. Could consciousness float free of matter, existing purely as thought or pure presence? Some spiritual traditions describe such states, where the self merges with the cosmos, transcending body and individuality. Near-death experiences sometimes hint at moments where consciousness seems to detach from physical existence, observing from afar. Science remains deeply skeptical of such claims, lacking clear mechanisms or evidence. Yet these reports continue to surface, nudging at the edges of what we believe possible. Even the concept of multiple selves within a single mind invites strange possibilities. Split brain studies, dissociative identity disorder, and certain meditative states reveal that the self may not be as unified as it seems. Could a single mind house multiple centers of awareness, each with its own perspective? Could consciousness be more like a council than a solitary monarch? If so, what we call the self might be a fragile consensus, a chorus of processes harmonizing just well enough to feel like one continuous I. In speculative fiction, stories often explore minds that fragment or multiply, blending science with metaphor. These narratives reflect an unsettling but fascinating truth. The self may be far more flexible, layered, and strange than our daily experience suggests. At the heart of all these speculations lies one quiet constant: the simple act of being aware. Whether in the farthest reaches of science fiction or the softest moments of daily life, consciousness remains the silent stage upon which all possibilities unfold. It invites endless questions, yet remains ever present, like a flame that flickers gently, illuminating every corner of existence, whether here, now, or in worlds yet unimagined. Even now, as you lie listening, your own consciousness floats through these questions, feeling their weight and wonder. You witness not only the thoughts themselves, but the quiet space that holds them, the soft glow behind every idea, every dream, every mystery. The story continues. Throughout this quiet journey, we have wandered through the vast and subtle landscape of consciousness. We have touched its science, its history, its mysteries, and its strange frontiers. Yet after all the theories, all the models, and all the careful words, something remains: the simple, undeniable fact that you are here, that you are listening, that you are aware, that you are being. This, perhaps, is the most astonishing thing of all. Consciousness is not merely a puzzle for philosophers or neuroscientists. It is not something found only in laboratories or classrooms. It is not contained within equations or diagrams. Rather, it is the gentle thread that stitches every moment together, the soft flame that flickers behind your eyes from morning's first light to night's final sigh. Even as we explore its mechanics, neurons firing, networks pulsing, molecules whispering, the feeling of consciousness remains unlike anything else. For all the maps of the brain we may draw, we have not yet drawn a map of experience itself, the fact that anything feels like anything. This is the miracle we carry in every breath. We began by asking, why are we aware? Why do we experience the world instead of simply reacting to it? Why does life unfold not only as motion and chemistry, but as sensation and thought? The questions remain. Perhaps they always will. Yet, in asking them, we do something profoundly human. We reflect. We wonder. We turn inward, not only to analyze, but to marvel. Consciousness allows us not only to live, but to contemplate what it means to live. In the earlier stories, people imagined consciousness as divine spark, a breath of spirit gifted by gods or ancestors. They saw awareness as something woven into nature itself, shared by animals, rivers, winds, and stars. Later, thinkers like Descartes split mind from matter, imagining a world divided between thinking souls and physical machines. Still later, science traced consciousness into the brain, mapping its structures, measuring its rhythms, and observing its fragile balances. Yet through each of these shifts, the mystery remained. With every new discovery, a deeper question unfolded. But why does any of this feel like anything? Why does matter, arranged in certain ways, glow softly from within? We have explored many models: global workspace theory, integrated information theory, quantum hypotheses, even panpsychism, each offering a window into the machinery or the mystery. Some suggest that consciousness is deeply tied to integration, to the sharing and binding of information across countless networks within the brain. Others propose that awareness may exist as a basic property of the universe itself, shimmering through all things in ways we barely grasp. Perhaps both are true, or perhaps neither. Perhaps consciousness will one day reveal itself as something we have not yet imagined, something that slips gently between our current categories, waiting patiently for our understanding to catch up. Beyond science, consciousness spills quietly into every corner of life. In morning's first breath, it awakens. In the stillness of meditation, it watches itself. In the embrace of a loved one, it expands and softens. In grief, it contracts, holding absence with aching care. In art, it colours the canvas of perception with joy, sorrow, beauty, and wonder. Every song you hear, every face you love, every moment you savour owes its richness to this quiet witness behind the scenes. Without consciousness, there would be no music, no memory, no meaning. Only silent mechanisms unfolding without audience or reflection. Memory stitches your past into your present, building the story of your life. Emotions colour each moment, painting your days with vibrant or muted hues. Attention directs the flow of your experience, deciding which details shine brightly and which slip softly into the background. Yet all of this exists upon the invisible stage of awareness itself. Without it, the story dissolves. Even sleep, where consciousness retreats, reminds us of its gentle rhythms. Each night, you release awareness, trusting that it will return with the morning light. Dreams offer glimpses into the mind's creative depths, surreal narratives spun from fragments of memory, imagination, and emotion. Sometimes you awaken gently, slipping from sleep like a diver surfacing. Other times you awaken abruptly, surprised to find yourself here again. Yet always, consciousness returns, as familiar as your own name, as silent as breath. In our wanderings, we have also touched the edges of strange possibilities. Could machines awaken? Could minds be copied, uploaded, or preserved? Might alien consciousness exist in forms beyond our imagining? Could awareness exist without body, without form, as pure thought or being? These are not merely science fiction curiosities. They reflect something intrinsic to consciousness itself, its hunger for expansion, its urge to explore what might be possible. Consciousness dreams of its own limits, reaching toward the stars both outside and within. Even here, as you listen, your own mind gently dances between reflection and imagination. You feel the warmth of the blanket, the softness of your breath, the weight of your body resting. You hear the quiet flow of words, not just as sound, but as meaning and feeling. You notice yourself noticing, a strange loop endlessly folding back upon itself. This recursive quality, awareness being aware of awareness, may be the most peculiar trait of all. Consciousness does not simply exist. It knows that it exists. It stands quietly behind every moment, both participant and witness, despite our best efforts, despite our brightest minds and finest instruments. The core mystery remains. What is it truly that experiences? Where does the flicker of being arise? Why does the universe contain something as delicate and intimate as the feeling of presence? Science can map the mechanisms, measure the patterns, observe the activity. Philosophy can shape the questions, refine the distinctions, build careful arguments. Yet both stand before a door that remains for now softly closed. Perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps the mystery is not a flaw to be solved, but a beauty to be held. You do not need to fully understand consciousness to live within it. You do not need to dissect the candle's flame to feel its warmth. Awareness itself may be the greatest gift. not for what it explains, but for what it allows. The ability to see beauty, the capacity to love and be loved, the wonder of gazing at the stars, the quiet ache of longing, the joy of laughter shared, the soft peace of being held, the steady rhythm of your own breath in the dark. We may never fully grasp why consciousness exists, yet here we are, quietly aware, gently present. The mystery lives inside you as much as around you. Even now, as you drift toward rest, you remain the silent witness to this unfolding story. A soft flame glowing gently in the dark, illuminating each passing moment as it arrives, lingers and fades. Sleep well, fellow traveller. You carry the mystery within you. So, dear listener, where are you now? What time is it in your quiet corner of the world? Perhaps your eyelids grow heavy. Perhaps your mind floats gently between thought and dream. Perhaps the night has wrapped itself around you, holding you softly as your breath rises and falls like a quiet ocean tide. We have travelled far together tonight, through the winding paths of consciousness, across history, through science, philosophy, speculation and wonder. We asked why we are aware, why this strange light of experience flickers behind our eyes, why being feels like something. Though the answers remain elusive, perhaps that is part of the beauty. The mystery itself is what invites us to pause, to marvel, to simply sit with the quiet miracle that we are here at all. Even now your own consciousness holds these words, feels this moment, carries the warmth of being alive. No matter how many models we build, no matter how deeply we peer into the brain's intricate networks, the simple truth remains: you experience, you are aware, you are present. As you rest now, let your thoughts soften. Let your body sink deeper into the comfort of your bed. Let the weight of the day dissolve into the stillness of night. Thank you for sharing this journey. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to return again, whenever your mind needs a quiet space to drift. For now, sleep well, fellow traveller, wherever and whenever you are.